everyone. I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Happiness Hour. Every week, I introduce you to a new photographer that shares their tips and stories to inspire you to try something new. If you haven't signed up yet, you can join our newsletter at lindanickell.com/happiness hour. Tonight's guest is Ray Hennessy. Ray is a nature and wildlife photographer whose hobby quickly grew into a full-time career. He's especially drawn to birds, spending countless hours out in natural areas, waiting for just the right light and composition to create images that feel both fresh and unique. What's especially wonderful about Ray is that he doesn't just stop at taking beautiful photos. He's all about sharing what he's learned with others. You might already know him from his Wildlife Photo Chat podcast, his thoughtful blog post, or his helpful videos on YouTube at Ray Hennessy. And if you've ever wanted to take your learning one step further, Ray also offers the chance to join him out in the field on a workshop where you can put ideas into practice side by side with him. In tonight's presentation, Creative Bird Photography, Ray explores the creative techniques that transform bird images into works of art. He'll demonstrate how to use light, space, bokeh, proximity, action, and hides to capture truly distinctive images. You can connect with him through his website at rayhennessy.com. And if you're on Instagram, look for him at rayhennessy_wildlife. And I'll link those in the show notes below. Welcome to the Happiness Hour, Ray.
Thank you so much, Linda. What a wonderful introduction. I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you for saying yes to me, sir. We were chatting just before we hit record, and you were one of the people that I've been following for a very long time. And as I go through planning my speaker list, I have this little list. It's a very short list of the people that I know they're not going to say yes, but I have to ask anyway. And you were on that top of that list. And when you said yes, I was so excited and so giddy. And I was telling a few of my girlfriends that, know that what I'm doing over here. And they're just like, what? And they didn't know, they're not photographers. They didn't feel the excitement that I felt, but I still have it. And so I've been excited about having you, and thank you for coming and sharing what you know and spending your Wednesday evening with us. So with that,
Oh, certainly.
what did I miss in your intro? If you want to go in and fill in
Oh,
blank.
you covered it all. You nailed it. Yeah.
All
I got
right.
nothing else to add. Nothing else worthwhile. Yeah. That was great.
All right. All right. With that, the screen is yours.
All right. Let me get the screen sharing going here. So I want to talk to you guys about creative bird photography. And I'm just going to open the presentation with a quick story to give you a little bit of an idea of my approach to bird photography. So quite a few years back, it's the middle of winter. I am going out to photograph some waterfowl in southern New Jersey. It's really cold, and I met up with a friend. So we have to go into this spot. We're going to try and photograph hooded mergansers. And we go out, and it's well before sunrise, probably about an hour before sunrise in the dark. And we have to walk in the dark because if we go in too late and the birds see us, they're going to fly away and we'll never get a chance to photograph them. We can't use a flashlight because, again, that's going to scare them. And I've learned sort of the path to walk in to this pond, this lakeside, where we're going to lay in some hides. Except I'm going to go a little bit of a step further on this particular outing, and I'm using my underwater housing. I'm in my dry suit, and I'm going to get in the water. So we get all bundled up and layered up. It's really cold, and we make our way in, and we get to the side of the lake there, nice and quiet, sneak in. We can actually hear some of the ducks around, so we know they're there, which is exciting. And so I go to get into the water, and I have to actually break through a thin sheet of ice. That kind of gives you an idea of how cold it is. And so my friend gets settled in under her blanket hide, and she's all set. And I find a little spot tucked in along the shoreline while I'm in the water and kind of crunch through that ice and try to be as quiet as possible. didn't work that well. The birds moved away a little bit, but we knew they didn't fly away. And so now it's just time to sit there in the cold, in the water, and let the light come up, let the sunrise come up. It's clear day. We know it's going to be some beautiful, beautiful light. And so I'm sitting there and patiently waiting, and I'm starting to feel like, wow, it's a little bit like colder on my leg than I'm used to. But I just figure it's got to be just the cold water. And so I wait a couple more minutes, and I'm like, no, it really feels like there's water running down my leg. And the kicker is, this is the first time I'm trying my brand new battery powered electric socks to keep my feet warm because my feet always freeze every time I've done something like this prior to that. And so now I'm sitting there thinking, as I realize water is running down my leg and heading towards those socks, and I'm like, am I going to get electrocuted in these things in here? Like, this is running through my head. And so I finally just have to kind of stop everything and go climbing out. And I realize there was definitely water getting in there. And thankfully, no electrocution. The water ran down the opposite side of my leg where the battery was on these socks, so it didn't get them wet. And I just realized I just didn't seat the zipper enough on my dry suit. And so I got to go kind of really yank it down and seal it up. And I'm like, all right, now I'm a little wet. It's pretty cold, but the birds are here. It's starting to get light. And I'm like, what am I going to do? Let's get right back in there. And so here's a photo that my friend took me that morning while I was out in this cold water trying to photograph these birds. And we didn't have too much luck with the hooded mergansers, but we did have some really nice mute swans that came in. Here's one of the examples that I took, and this was with my 300 f4 and a 1.4 converter, so 420 millimeter in an underwater housing. And this is the kind of unique stuff I was after. And so this whole story is to just kind of share sort of the lengths I'll go to try and get some unique photos. All right, so let's talk about how we get creative. How do we move beyond a simple bird portrait? The first thing we learn about with any kind of photography, but especially wildlife, is light. And so most people learn to front light their subject. That's the sun is coming from behind you over your shoulder, illuminating your subject. It works great. It's bright, it's vivid. You can capture action with it. It shows the bird's detail and colors really nicely. And so it's a great way to get started. And especially when you have super colorful birds like this American flamingo that I photographed down in Florida. So it's a great start. It's a really good starting point. But how can we improve on that basic lighting? Well, the next step is golden hour. If for anybody not familiar with it, it's the term for the first hour of light in the morning, the last hour of light in the evening. And for a lot of us, especially most of you folks in Texas, it's more like the golden 15 minutes or so on these clear days. So it's a little bit of an exaggerated term, I'd say, but the same kind of concept applies here. We have the light coming in from behind us over our shoulder, illuminating our subject, but now it's lower in the sky. It's illuminating the subject with a much more pleasing light, not quite as intense and strong. We get some warm golden tones, and it just works beautifully. So that's sort of the next step, right? And sometimes when you get those early mornings or just the right conditions, you get those rosy gold colors, and it looks wonderful. And with the right setup and the right intensity, that beautiful golden light, we can still capture some action. So beyond that, I started moving into dawn and dusk. And this is where modern cameras really help us out. Image stabilization, really good higher ISOs, all of these things allow us to shoot lower shutter speeds and start to capture before the sun comes up and after the sun goes down. And it's a time I really encourage a lot of photographers to spend time out there with wildlife. A lot of wildlife is active, and you get these beautiful pastel tones. Sometimes they're kind of intense, like you see here with this Atlantic puffin, but this is more what we're looking for, those soft blues and pinks and purples. And it's just a beautiful time to be out there. It usually does mean we're pushing our settings a little bit more, but it's just a wonderful time. So I really encourage people to not go away after the sun sets and to get there before the sun comes up, because it definitely can be worth your time to get these incredibly beautiful colors and tones in the image. And we still tend to get some really nice dramatic light. But it can be slower shutter speeds, like you can see here, 25th of a second to keep that ISO down to a manageable thing. But yeah, I definitely love shooting at those times. Those dawn dusk colors can be really, really nice. So the next evolution of that for me was pushing even further. So even earlier in the morning, or in most cases, later in the evening, into almost dark. And this is where we are really pushing our settings. So you can see on this example of an American avocet out at the Great Salt Lake, 1/40th of a second at f4 at 12,800 ISO. So really pushing the settings. Here's even more extreme, tenth of a second. This was handheld. I was in the water getting knocked around by some waves. I was about waist deep in the water in Florida trying to photograph this night heron at night that was illuminated just by some street lamps. And that's the other fun thing about going into the dark like this is we can start to play with urban lighting. This is just a street light in the back that can be made to look like the moon, or we can do another street light like this one in the moon to make it look like the moon in the background. Or sometimes you actually can capture the moon in the background. But city lights are amazing. They make a really unique looking photo. And boy, can these cameras do some stuff like focusing in very, very minimal light, really pushing those settings. And especially with current modern noise reduction, you can get away with a lot more than we used to be able to. And so I just love really pushing myself and the gear kind of to the max, trying to photograph birds in these really dark nighttime environments. Here's another great example. This is an eastern screech owl that I photographed in Florida. We had a campsite set up and we had a fire going. Oddly enough, this is actually a gray morph of one of these birds. It's not as red as it looks, and because it's illuminated by firelight. This bird flew in, we heard it calling, and it came in and landed near our campsite. And so we went and grabbed our 135 f1.8 so we could really work in the dark like this and capture this bird, which was really, really cool. All right, so all of this is considering just, generic light over your shoulder. How can we start to play with the light a little bit more? Well, we can get directional with that light. So early mornings, late evenings, we're still working in that golden hour, but now instead of shooting with the light over our shoulder, we're starting to get directional with it. So the light coming in hard from the side, it makes for really dramatic photos. It can make ducks like this wood duck look pretty badass. Um, and you can get some really dramatic stuff. My favorite setup like this is to seek out and look for these dark shaded backgrounds. So the sun is illuminating my subject, like you see here with the snowy egret. I expose for that subject, the background is in shade, and I get this dark, near black or completely solid black background. And boy, does it make a photo look dramatic, doesn't it? It has almost a studio look to it. So certainly a favorite style of mine, playing with that strong directional light to really play with these contrast and dark shaded backgrounds. And it doesn't always have to be in open areas with water. It can happen in the forest sometimes, like you see here. Another great example of how that incredible dramatic mood can really make a photo stand out. This style of lighting, overcast lighting, is the one that I hear a lot of photographers sort of lament, especially weekend photographers. They kind of say, "Oh, I was going to go out and shoot, but it was overcast, so I didn't bother." And I think that's a big miss. Again, with modern cameras and lower shutter speeds, we can really take advantage of that soft light. And if we think about being in the forest, especially with these songbirds, number one, they're really colorful. The backgrounds in the forest can be really green and have some really nice vivid colors. So we don't need that vibrant sun to help us out a lot of the time. And if we think about being in the forest, if we did have the sun coming through, imagine what would happen if there was full sun shining on this image right here or an image like this. There's going to be hard shadows, really bright spots all over our subject, all over the perches, in the foregrounds and backgrounds, hot spots and shadows galore. It's going to be kind of a mess. And that's usually what happens when you try and photograph in the forest in the sun. So with overcast light like this, we get to shoot in any direction. Soft lighting, we don't have to worry about hard shadows anywhere. And a bonus, we don't have to just work with that really nice golden hour or golden 30 minutes of light. We get to extend our day. And in fact, if it's a cloudy day all day and you have really nice backgrounds like this, you can shoot all day long. Not that I want to do that all the time, but sometimes it is really fun to go out for a long outing. So it can really extend your sessions. And it doesn't just have to be in the forest, right? Here you can see in the open marsh it works. And here in more of an open desert habitat. As long as we find some kind of tone in the background, so we're not just getting a gray, boring sky in the background, these photos can really work. And here's another great example taken up in Alaska. Um, but one of the other things we can do on these overcast days when we can't find the color in the background is to lean into the high key look. And that is to just let that background go pure white. So we expose for our subject, we can shoot up towards the sky, we can shoot in towards that gray water, let it go light. And now we have the opposite of what we were doing with that dark black background and the strong directional light. But now we just get a nice clean palette. And again, really simplistic, a little bit more minimal. It really shows off, highlights our subject, their shapes, their colors, and that sort of thing. Fog is another wonderful time to take advantage of high key lighting. But look at this. It really just highlights your subject, doesn't it? It's all about your subject because there's nothing else to look at in an image like this. Snow, obviously, is another great advantage for these high key things. So that's a nice way to kind of simplify what would otherwise be a busy scene. All right, so that's sort of the section on light. All right, so space, that's the next area that I start to try and get more creative. And so, why do I maybe want to use space in my photos? Well, one of the biggest reasons is to help show off the habitat, to show off where these birds live. If we imagine this hooded warbler, if I had taken a close up portrait that just filled the frame with, it would be nice. We get to see all the beautiful details of this very uniquely colored bird, but we would have no idea of where it lives, what kind of habitat it likes to spend its time in. But when I zoom out or take a step back, like I did here, you get to actually see this beautiful mossy habitat. We might be able to so we get a sense of what the weather was currently like and stuff like that. We get so much more information about this bird. What about when we have a scene like this? Again, imagine a close up of this common loon. Common loons are some of the most stunning birds out there. They work really well with close ups, but if I have it in front of a scene like this, you better believe I'm going to zoom out, go wider, and really try and show this scene off because this is so much more compelling, in my opinion, in a scene like this than that close up shot would be. And here's a great example of combining those dawn dusk times with smaller in frame and using space in your image. And so a ton of these examples are all about showing off the habitat, where these birds live, what kind of habitat that they're currently in, because a lot of them kind of change habitats depending on the time of year. And fog is a wonderful simplifier for it as well. But I just really love backing off, showing the space. But here's the challenge with that as well, right? Is now that we're including a lot more habitat and other things in the photo, how do we make the bird the star of the show? And that's the goal and the challenge with all of this, right? So placement becomes very important. Having backgrounds that are really far away so I can still get shallow depth of field, even though my subject is small in the frame, is really important. Okay. Um, really paying attention to composition becomes more important than when you're just filling the frame with your subject. So all of these things start to come into play. And to me, it is one of the more challenging styles of bird and wildlife photography. And so I really love just trying to push myself with that to make these images work. One of the other things we can show off when we have more space is weather. If we have snowy conditions or heavy rain conditions, well, why not back off and zoom out and show off more of that weather? And here's another great example of the storytelling ability of showing more space and more habitat. This is the Louisiana water thrush in Pennsylvania that I photographed many years ago. And these birds, in their breeding habitat and even off non-breeding season, they rely on water, usually moving small, swift streams like this to find their food source. And so, again, a close-up photo of this bird sitting on the perch singing would be nice to show off the bird, but it would give me no context about where these birds live and how connected they are to small streams and rivers like this. But a shot like this, the is still the star of the show. He's standing out there against that muted background, but we now get to see all that river and stream beneath it that ties it to the habitat that it really relies on. And so we get a much more of a story. Urban environments can be great as well. We can kind of show how birds work with urban environments and man-made objects as well. So the next evolution of that style of photography is to start using wider angle stuff. And so everything you just saw previously was all with a little bit more telephoto lenses, but we can also really start to show off habitat by going wider angle. And so you're going to see progressively wider images as we go. So here's some stuff at 100 millimeter. Again, just really trying to show off the beautiful habitat. I love something like this in Bisty Badlands in New Mexico. If we have these incredible Badlands habitat, these unique rock formations, why not zoom out and show it off like this with this rock wren, right? In the forest here, 95 millimeter foggy hemlock forest with this Blackburnian warbler in northern New Jersey, or a beautiful rocky coastline like this with a red-tailed tropic bird chick. You can see that little fuzzball tucked in right at the bottom. And then we have this incredible Hawaiian coastline in the background with beautiful rainbow. You better believe it's time to zoom out, go wider, and show all that off, right? Although I did make sure to take a close up of that thing because that was like one of the cutest, fuzziest chicks I have ever seen in my life. That thing was just the biggest fluff ball. It was so fun. So continuing to go wider and wider, now we have to get closer to our subjects. So again, it's definitely more of a challenge and a fun challenge that I love to try. But now we're starting to really play with the relationship of, showing off a lot of the habitat that these birds live in. Now we're down to 35 millimeter. If you got a beautiful sky, beautiful sunrise, sunset, why not zoom out a little bit, try a wider lens if you have a friendly subject and show it off. Uh, the biggest challenge for a lot of people is, well, I can never get close enough at 600 millimeter. How are you going to get close enough at 30 millimeter like this? A lot of these photos, not all of them, but a lot of them are places and locations where birds are just more acclimated. Simply head to Florida like this, the birds are your best friends, right? No, honestly though, this was in Florida, but this was just a location where birds are used to fishermen being around. They actually try and steal bait from the fishermen, and so being close to them is not an issue. Okay, but other times it can just be seabirds. That's a wonderful target species where they just generally have little fear of humans, even though they aren't really particularly acclimated or anything like that. And again, with these seabird colonies or any place that has a lot of beautiful habitat, let's go wider, let's show it off, but still try to make the bird the star of the show. And here we are down to 24 millimeter. This was down in dry tortugas with these brown noddies. And I really had this incredible sky. I wanted to show where they were, perched all over these old pilings from an old pier that had been there that had just since disintegrated, and just that beautiful tropical water and sky. So, and I knew these birds were friendly. I waited out in the water with them previously, so I was able to make sure I can capitalize and show off that whole environment, even at 24 millimeter. And then I got really close to this guy. And so this is the other interesting thing, right? I had never worked with this species before, but just learning bird behavior and watching their behavior, understanding if they perceive me as a threat, and I just slowly moved in. This bird was preening the entire time. And so he just kept pausing every once in a while to check me out and then go right back to preening. And so knowing that that's a relaxed, calm behavior, they don't tend to do that when they're in fear. I was able to just keep approaching, and I ended up getting so close. I was holding the camera over my head, so I was using my just LCD screen just to get this perspective, and I held the camera in so close that I didn't even realize I was inside minimum focus with 24 millimeter. And I have a bunch of photos that I was too close to and out of focus. Thankfully, I had backed off and moved in and backed off, and I had plenty of them sharp to get this shot. But yeah, sometimes these birds are incredibly friendly. And guys, this is not, pushing too hard, because that bird stayed there. I slowly backed away and just left him to continue what it was doing. It didn't even fly away as I was trying to photograph this stuff. And that's an important thing. As we get closer, as we get wider focal lengths, the ethics of doing that with bird and wildlife photography definitely become even more important, because we're in such close proximity. We want to make sure we're moving really slow, we're really paying attention to behavior, or sometimes just letting birds approach us. So that's definitely the key with something like this, with this northern gannet flying. This thing's flying right over top of me. And so now we've gone here from this previous image, 24 millimeter, to try and show off this colony, to this year, I've gone even more extreme and started using a 10 millimeter lens. So you can see how much of this colony that 24 millimeter shows, which is a good bit. But if we look at that with 10 millimeter, that same colony that we're just seeing the top of this rock with a portion of it, at 10 millimeter, we can see almost the entire thing, plus all the additional landscape around it. It's extremely wide. This bird was probably flying 3 feet over my head, if that, right? So they have to get extremely close. And it's been a real fun challenge for me to work with a lot of these different seabirds, but also some other species with this 10 millimeter lens in the past year, to really extremely try and show off birds in their habitat. And I love using space to do that. So it's just a great way to incorporate landscape and habitat. And hopefully, what you see with every one of these examples is the bird is still the star of the show. And so that's my goal all along, is I want to show off this amazing Hawaiian coastline with this wedge-tailed shearwater. But I want to make sure that your eye goes to that bird first and then explores the rest of the scene. And here's another example of taking advantage of that 10 millimeter for these northern gannets and the seabird colonies. Here's one actually down in Texas for you guys. This was at Big Bend. This is one of my first times photographing a canyon wren. And it was one of the first successful photos I had ever taken with this 10 millimeter lens. I have some telephoto, beautiful portraits of this bird because they are stunning. But when I saw this kind of canyon formation there, and I really just wanted to show off like where this bird lives. And so he was flying away like through this space. Honestly, it's probably about a foot or two in front of me at most, but it's still that tiny because it's a smaller bird and it's 10 millimeter. And this is just simply like an overhanging rock that I had tucked into. That's all that is that gives this incredible curve and shape and almost makes you feel like you're in a cave like that. So I absolutely love doing that sort of thing, showing off these beautiful landscapes and sunrises and sunsets with these wider angle focal lengths. And then if you're going to give me a double rainbow arching over the sky with some puffins, why not, right? Let's take that at 10 millimeter and really show off that habitat. So I think I saw a question there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So Kevin has a question. He wanted to know where that gannet colony was.
yeah, sure thing. That was in Newfoundland where I do my seabird workshop every year. Yeah.
Okay. I've got another question I'm going to hold for later, but go ahead
Okay.
and yeah.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, let's keep it going. So, what's the other thing we can do when we back up and have a little bit more space? We can show size. And usually that means showing how small these birds are in their environment. It works really well with baby birds to really show how tiny they are and kind of against the scale of the big scary world. But it can work well with adult birds as well. And I really love playing with scale and size with these birds, kind of making a golden wing warbler like this just look like a little leaf in that space. Another thing we can use space for is color. And if you've got some beautiful color in your scene, especially in the foreground and background surrounding your bird, why not show off more of it? And that's a great reason to back off or to zoom out and include more of that space around it. And it can be extreme sometimes, like this, just a ton of never ending color at the Great Salt Lake where you can't even see the horizon of water blend into the sky. Or, just basically in my backyard at the condo I used to live in New Jersey when there's some beautiful autumn colors. And again, so you can see how space here is really important to include more of that beautiful color. And it doesn't have to be a crazy color, right? Just a nice smooth green that contrasts nicely with an indigo bunting does the trick as well. Then we get into foreground. Foreground is a great way to add or take advantage, I should say, of that additional space. And we start to put things in the foreground that give us really fun textures. We find little tunnels to shoot through. It gives us crazy patterns from the out of focus things in the foreground. And it's a really fun way to take advantage of smaller in frame space. Finding, this black-bellied whistling duck, just two trunks, tree trunks that I found a little sliver to shoot through. And it kind of simplified the scene and made things look a little bit easier on the eye, which was really nice. And then playing with shooting through foreground bushes. So we get bokeh in the foreground. Speaking of bokeh, that's a wonderful way of including something in the foreground with more space. If we have sparkly bubbles on the water that are glittering in that early morning sun, why not back off, make our bird smaller in the frame, and show off more of that sparkly bokeh instead of being frame fillingly close? And so this is another great way to take advantage of space, especially if you can get other textures in that foreground bokeh. It can be on the water, or it can just be the sun sparkling off of grains of sand, like you see here with this baby piping plover chick, or a splash of water in the air that sparkles everywhere. All right, so I just got done saying how much I love going smaller in frame, using more space. What's another way to get really creative with your bird photography? And that is getting close. All right. And so for me, when I get close, I like to get really close, scarily close, making the bird sometimes not even fitting it entirely in the frame. But it's a wonderful way to really show off the bird's details. It's the reason a lot of us want to try and get these frame filling close portraits. We've got a beautiful bird like this bufflehead duck with incredible iridescence. Why not get close and show it off? So while my preference is to try and show off more habitat, I certainly don't shy away from close-up opportunities like this. This is actually a young male hooded merganser who hasn't transitioned into adult plumage yet, but he's got the fun hair going, the snow falling on him. It's just looking great. It's a wonderful way to take advantage of that. And then you can get extremely close like this and just get some real drama out of it, right? Kind of an intense stare, almost a little scary feeling like that gannet's going to reach out and get you. So beautiful birds, beautiful details, getting intensity, showing off unique features like a really nice bill and the beautiful eye color of a white ibis, or just really intricate plumage of a red-shouldered hawk. These are all great ways to take advantage of getting close and things that show off nicely. And you already saw some more scenic, smaller in frame loon photos from me, but when presented with an opportunity like this to show off the beautiful plumage of a loon, also with this light misty rain beating up on its head, that's the time for me to go close. And so close, I don't even have the rest of its body in the frame because that's what shows off this beautiful beating of water on this bird's head. And so I love getting close and sometimes extremely close where it's almost abstract. With these very friendly brown pelicans in Florida, I was able to shoot some extreme close-ups where I played into feather details and stuff like that, or just a water drip off of the bill of a wood stork. All great ways to take advantage of getting close. Another way I like to get creative is action. So everything you've seen for the most part has been mostly just bird portrait photography. Action's a great way to enhance a photo, make it stand out. A lot of action revolves around feeding behaviors. And so that's what I pay attention to a lot when doing that, like this black skimmer slicing through the water or a snowy egret striking out at a fish, making a big splash. It can be just something as simple as a semi-palm plover pulling a worm, but all of these behaviors create some action. And it's something a little bit different, more interesting, more fun to look at than just a static portrait where nothing else is happening. Some other great forms of action are interaction. Usually that revolves around birds and their young, with feeding and taking care of them and making sure they survive. So it's a great way to capture some action and interaction in your photos. And again, elevate it beyond just that static portrait. But it can also be territorial sometimes. Like here's a black skimmer and a common tern fighting. That's some incredibly fun action to try and capture. Or it can be mating like these least terns. If you've never had the privilege of seeing any tern species on the beach, I'll tell you a quick story about what they do. The male, who is on top here, goes out, catches a fish, flies back into the colony of birds where all the females are, and then he starts showing it off. So he parades around looking for a female to take it. Needless to say, there's a lot of males running around the beach just carrying fish that no female wants anything to do with. But if a female likes what he's brought back, she takes that fish from him, accepts the gift, and then they get to mate. So it's a really fun experience and a wonderful way to capture some behavior in action. And here's some other fun action which with some courtship behavior from a sandhill crane. Birds in flight, that's another great way of capturing action, right? But not just paying attention to standard birds in flight. I love concentrating on birds taking off and landing. To me, this is when they're at their most extreme, right? The wing positions required for takeoffs and landing are much stronger and bigger movements, more exaggerated movements, like the this short-billed dowitcher putting on the brakes, trying to drop into a marsh, or an Arctic tern flaring right before it dropped into that same marsh, actually. Um, Taking off, right? So we got reddish egret just like really pushing those wings down. We get the splash coming out of the water. All of these things are a little bit more exaggerated during these periods of takeoffs and landings. And so I love trying to capture that action when we're doing birds in flight, just to kind of exaggerate things and make it, again, that extra step more creative or more unique than just standard birds in flight. But again, there's nothing wrong with standard birds in flight, and just having them flying through the sky can be another great form of action. Preening is some more great action. And if you really pay attention to birds when they're preening, you get all these funny ruffled shapes. So they look kind of silly and funny and different. And then a lot of the times, almost every time, in fact, most birds, when they're done preening, are going to flap their wings to kind of, get the feathers all lined up right or dry off if they were in some water. You can capture some royal terns just twisting and turning and doing everything they can just to get to that right feather, or some really unique preying behavior that I got to experience in Florida with this prairie warbler. It was in a salt marsh environment. There's no fresh water for these birds to bathe in anywhere around, and their feathers are not built for salt water. So, what's the bird to do? Well, every morning it's really humid in Florida, and so the dew gathers on these sea grapes leaves, and they get to go on there and rub their body all over it to get wet, and that's how they bathe. And so, being able to pick up on that, pay attention to that bird behavior, and then follow through and capture something like that allowed me to capture a unique behavior with this prairie warbler, which was really fun to do. But again, getting these flapping actions like that, predicting that these birds are going to do that most of the time after the fact, is always really fun. And just hilarious watching certain birds, especially these royal terns. They get so into their bathing, it's just extreme and insane and hilarious. So it's a lot of fun to watch. Some other ways are purposeful motion. This is truly the definition of spray and pray, where we're using intentionally slow shutter speeds and trying to pan with the subject so that I get some or part of the bird in focus while the rest of it is blurred. And so I love doing this. My favorite shutter speed lately is 1/10 of a second to really exaggerate that blur and get that motion, but still try and get that bird sharp. It does mean you have to take a lot of photos to just get one, maybe two potentially usable shots. Sometimes just one or two out of 500 to 1,000 photos is all you're going to get. But when it does turn out, it can look really good and unique. And I've even started to apply that same technique with wider focal lengths, like you see here. Um, the other way we can do it is with a static bird, and if the environment's moving around it, especially with a big crashing waves along the Pacific coast with this black oyster catcher, or overhead back at that seabird colony in Newfoundland, really taking advantage of slower shutter speeds and letting the ocean and water splash and move around while your subject stays really still, all the way down to 1/5 of a second in this case with this gull along the California coast. And here's another interesting thing about this one. I shot this handheld. That's how incredible the stabilization is on these cameras right now. I did not have a tripod with me. I didn't rest it on any rocks. I just sat there holding my camera, steady in my hand. I took a bunch of photos. I didn't get them all sharp, but sometimes all you need is that one sharp photo. And so this is another way to be able to capture that stuff. Pre-capture is another great tool to use to try and capture action, especially with these fast-moving birds that kind of take off and blast out of the frame too quick for you to even react to. So pre-capture comes into the rescue there, excuse me, and allows you to photograph these action moments and capture them even before after the bird has gone out of your frame. And so it's a wonderful tool that I really love to use certain times with these smaller, faster moving birds. And I think it works really, really well. I can't wait until, at least on my system, the Nikon, until they add it with RAW. I'm sure it'll happen at some point, but I know some of the other camera systems have that already. All right. Any other questions before we start talking about photography from a hide? I don't see anything in the chat, so I think we'll just keep going. All right, excellent. All right, working from a hide. This is the definition of just a ton of boredom, long, long times with nothing much happening, interspersed with sometimes incredible action. And it's also really, really fun to be able to witness bird behavior when they have no clue you're there. So you know you're not interfering it with them at all. You're really getting to witness that natural behavior. And sometimes it's usually with species that I can't get anywhere near any other way. And so anybody that's tried to photograph belted kingfishers probably knows how much of a pain they are. They love to fly away way before you get anywhere near them, and then they cackle and laugh at you the whole way as they're flying. But using a hide, I was able to get really close to them. Same thing with these eagles, or in this case, a green heron, actually in my floating hide, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So these skittish ducks, a lot of different waterfowl, clapper rails, all these species that are more often heard than seen are a great way to use a hide and photograph them. And here's another example of that floating hide. I was actually in the water with these black skimmers. They flew around me, 6 of them flying around me in this small non-tidal pool for about an hour straight of me photographing them. And guys, it was so cool. At some points, they were flying so close to me that I could hear their bills slicing through the water. It was an amazing experience, and one that I was only able to capture because I was in the hide and they had no clue I was there. They just thought it was a floating bush. All right, so let's start talking about a couple more of my favorite lighting techniques. We did a lot of talk about earlier on about front light and side light and that sort of thing. So let's talk about what happens when we do the opposite of that. In the beginning, I talked about having that sun come in over your shoulder, but what happens when we shoot into that sun? Well, one of the things we can do is silhouette our subject. And this is when it becomes more about the background. We expose for that background and show off that. Our bird simply becomes a shadow or just the shape of the bird. And so for me, it's really important to pay attention to the shape of your bird in that case. So almost all of my silhouettes are going to be a profile, and it's the reason for that is that shows off the shape of the bird the best. And then my goal is I hope that most people, if they really know the birds, can tell exactly what species it is, or at least roughly what type of bird. So most people might know that this is some kind of shorebird. And if you really know your birds, and I told you this was taken in South Carolina in the winter, you might be able to guess this is a marbled godwit. Or in this case, a sparrow along the coastal marshes of New Jersey. and we got a seaside sparrow here. But we get to really play with color and shape and cleanliness and reflections off the water like this. And so I love shooting silhouettes in circumstances where we're shooting into the sun and we just expose for that background. All right. And you get some beautiful colors that way. We can capture action with it as well, with fishing and hunting behavior, or we can line things up like this great blue heron and these rays of light beaming down just to illuminate that bird and silhouette them against that sky. Some really fun splashes and waves. We can play with it with flocks of birds. And sometimes you don't even need the bird in the frame. Sometimes it can just be a shadow, like you see here of this snowy egret in Florida. This is one of my favorite examples to show how creative a silhouette can turn an otherwise ordinary scene into something what I think is hopefully much more interesting and creative. And so this is what that same scene looked like. This ovenbird flew into this perch, landed there. I took a frame or two of this and quickly realized this is pretty boring. The light's kind of flat, the perch isn't that exciting, and there's just not a lot compelling going on in this photo. And then a second later, I noticed the light, sort of these bright spots of sky filtering through the forest in the background. And so I moved over, I quickly dialed in some negative exposure compensation, silhouetted that bird against the dark or the bright spot coming through the forest. And what I didn't expect, this is the luck part of it. The bird profiled for me, sang, and then I got this beautiful shot. All of this happened probably within like less than 30 seconds. Bird came in, landed, boring shot. I moved, lined it up with the background, darkened the exposure. He sang, and then away he flew. So thinking quick and thinking creatively allowed me to capture something a little bit more unique in this circumstance. But the beauty of it is, once I realized that, I was able to start being more intentional about it in the future. Every time a bird was up too high or just against that brighter forest background with the sky filtering through. And so I started intentionally seeking that out, trying to capture these silhouettes. Another evolution of my silhouette photography is in the beginning, it was always just that brighter sky, brighter background. But then I started including the reflection of the sun in the water. Okay. And then I started lining up the reflection of the sun in the water. And then I started including the actual sun in the background around the subject or behind the subject, like this silhouette here. And then I started trying to include the sun right next to it and expose for that sun. And then the next evolution was, well, let's try and silhouette a bird inside the sun. So I had a lot of fun with sun placement over the years and trying to get things to line up. You guys should have seen me running down the beach like a maniac trying to line this up with this oyster catcher. It was a really fun time, but he went up on this hill, profiled, and gave me the shot I was after. So silhouette photography, I think, can be really powerful and dramatic. It's a wonderful way to kind of capture these unique scenes. But again, utmost importance of the shape and placement of your bird. And we can also do it at night with this street light in the background. So that's a fun way of doing that. The next style of lighting is just the same as silhouettes. We're shooting into the sun, except this time, instead of those brighter, colorful backgrounds, now we're starting to seek out a darker or mid-tone background. And instead of silhouetting my subject, I now get to see some detail on my subject, and I get this beautiful backlit glow or rim light, as it's also called. So I get that rim of light around my subject. And boy, can this make a scene look incredible. Wonderful drama, the light, the color, the golden look of it all. You can play with bokeh in that, especially when you have like some nice trees in the background. Everything takes on a glow. You can show breath from a bird, like you see here when you're shooting into the sun and backlighting it, or you can just highlight some crazy feathers like this snowy egret, really flaring up that crest. Um, and so this is one of my favorite styles of lighting. I can seek out really dark backgrounds like you see here to really make my subject pop off the scene, and I get to expose for it. I don't have to turn it into a silhouette. So that's exactly what this is. Here's the formula. Shoot into the sun, find yourself a dark background. That's how you get these backlit or rimlit shots. And then you get to play with other things. We get to add foreground and space and bokeh into it, just like a lot of the different pieces I've talked about. Or we can render our scenes a little bit more simplistic and make it more about the outline of the subject, or play around with some drama in the forest. Here's a great example of where you can play with exposure. This is a yellow legs where I have a little bit more exposure on the bird. And then a moment later, I went really dark and turned it just into the outline of that subject as it was flipping its bill and sending some water drops around. Or you can have some really nice soft backlight where you just barely get the glow and some wonderful details on your subject. or go more dramatic with it with something a little bit darker. So lots of ways to play around here with these backlit subjects. Again, it's one of my favorite styles of lighting to shoot into. And then if you get really lucky, and conditions work out for you. In a single exposure, you can expose for your bird, see some detail on them, and expose the sun in the sky. This requires high humidity and a really low sun in the sky right after sunrise in this case, but every once in a while that does work out and you're able to do it. This was a really fun example where the water was warm and the air cool. And so when this wood stork lifted its foot out, it was just steaming. It looked like its foot was on fire. It was a wonderful moment on one of my workshops in South Carolina, and I was able to get all of the clients with me to get a shot like that. All right. Now, something else a little bit more fun, floating hide. I started using this many, many years ago. I built my own. This is the structure you can see right here. And I flipped the tripod collar, mounted it onto this whole system so I could raise and lower the camera. And you can see it allows me to actually lower it all the way down to those rails and get really low. I haven't used this floating hide in a long time. It's hard to kind of have something this big in the van that I live in, but it was an absolute blast. And it allowed me to get more creative and get vantage points and get close to subjects that I never could have otherwise. And so I talked about the black skimmers earlier. They were one of the great examples of things I got from that floating hide. Another technique is some remote wide angle stuff. You can see it doesn't always work out when the Stays Phoebe landed on the camera. This was taken in Alaska many years ago, and I didn't have a tripod with me, so this was my makeshift tripod setup. And the bird didn't land in the right spot, and they don't most of the time, but every so often they do, and this is the shot. Thankfully, he did move over to the perch after he landed on my camera, and also thankfully he didn't go ahead and crap on my camera while I was on it. But this can be a way of getting these really wide scenes with subjects that you just can't get close enough to while that camera is in your hand. It does require a lot of patience and a lot of planning, but it can yield some rather incredible results. So that's been another tool in my toolbox to get more creative and unique bird and wildlife photographs, is those really wide angle warblers and songbirds that I just can't get near. And then sometimes I've combined things like this long exposure American woodcock flying through the sky at 24 millimeter with a slow exposure and then two flashes that froze in at the end. And then you can actually see the wing beat pattern as he flew across the sky. So this is combining a whole bunch of different things to try and get really creative. Another fun creative thing lately is my donut bokeh lens. It's from TT Artisan. It's a 250 millimeter manual focus lens that creates these wild bokeh shapes in the background, these donut rings. And it's a real fun way. You can get these painterly looks with different birds, like these hummingbirds and some other things down in Costa Rica, and just really make these trippy backgrounds that are a lot of fun there, especially when shooting in through foreground and stuff like that. It's been a really fun lens, although very challenging with the manual focus. And the reason I don't use the underwater housing anymore, or I'm sorry, the floating hide, is because I have an underwater housing now. And I much prefer to use this. Incredible freedom around the water. It's really wild to be able to shoot with your really expensive camera around water and not have to worry about getting it wet. So that's a nice freedom. That being said, it's expensive to get these things, and it is also incredibly challenging to operate them and use them. So it does make the photography harder, but you get to do things like this, where I was swimming with a pair of Pacific loons up near Anchorage, Alaska. Although I will say, when they dove, I was like, in my head, I'm thinking, they have really pointy bills. I hope they don't poke this dry suit and then sink me. Thankfully, they were super chill and calm, and I was able to get a photo like this while swimming in the water with them, which was an amazing experience and one I'll never forget. But it allows me to shoot in the surf like this without having to worry about waves crashing on me, and then get perspectives where part of my lens is underneath the water and do crazy things with the sparkling water coming up over top of the horizon there, because there's water on the front of the glass element there, and just doing some really unique things. Here is one of those shots from that story I shared in the beginning of that hooded merganser that I was trying for in that underwater housing when I was out on that icy morning. And another crazy trippy shot shooting through some ice that was on some tree branches with these two different mute swans there. So I've had a ton of fun with the underwater housing. And then recently I've actually added a a dome port that you see me shooting with right there, and just getting in crashing surf and doing some wild stuff like that. This is the type of shot I was after, trying to get these waves crashing over top of me and capturing that. A lot of fun, but boy, did I get beat up on that. But you can do some really wild things with these wider focal lengths and this dome housing, as well as split level shots. And that's been like one of the most recent, really fun, wild things that I've been doing, is trying to use this with the really wide angle lens, usually this 10 millimeter, to photograph the birds and their habitat underneath. And there you can maybe even see that snowy egret's leg standing on the rock, or we get to just see under the water with the habitat of these birds. And so I love pushing myself. I love trying to capture these things in some unique environments. Here's another one of my favorite split level shots where I have this cormorant just drying its feathers, and you get to see the whole underwater habitat beneath it. Again, this is shot at 10 millimeter. And I'm not exaggerating when I say I'm less than a foot away from this bird. I actually have some videos on my website showing how close I actually was to this bird. And then being able to capture one like this with a turtle swimming in there and some fish underwater. So, sort of connecting the underwater portion with the above water portion and doing that with bird and wildlife photography. This to me has been kind of the pinnacle of me pushing myself for my creative bird and wildlife photography. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. So, real quick, I just want to plug my website, and then I'll answer any questions we have. If you're looking for to see any more from me, rayhennessy.com. Every single day, I have a new photo that goes on there, or some videos as well. As Linda mentioned, I do host workshops throughout, so you can just head to the workshop portion on my website to see all of those that are offered in the coming future. And I do have a lot of ways to learn online with me, some of them free, some of them you can pay. I really highly recommend you check out the Learn Wildlife Photography online course that I have, which I'm always adding to. It's completely free. It's available on YouTube or through my website. But if you go to the website, it's broken down into categories. You can see new videos and other lessons that I've shared. And guys, you get to see through the lens as I'm shooting, as well as a wide portion, and I narrate the whole thing to tell you exactly what I'm doing. It's like being on a workshop with me, except you get to do it virtually, watching that video. I do have a weekly video podcast on YouTube that I've been starting. I think we're on episode 10 now, so this is kind of fairly new. And then, as mentioned, I have the audio only wildlife photo chat podcast where I interview guests every week. That comes out where I have a new guest come on to talk about how they get creative with their wildlife photography. So that's everything I offer. Thank you so much. Let's hear some questions.
Whew. Okay, so I have been following you for a while, Ray, and so you put out a photo in your Instagram feed, I think every day.
Yes.
But for me to see all these photos like in one presentation, it's like, oh my gosh, the amount of work that you have been able to collect and make over the years is just phenomenally beautiful.
Thank you.
Phenomenally beautiful. So
Thank you.
this y'all, this is Linda's selfish hours. So thank y'all for coming. All right, so we do have a couple of questions. So Sherry typed it in just as you moved on, so I didn't want to interrupt you, but can you tell her what pre-capture is?
Oh, yeah, sure thing. So,
Mhm.
pre-capture is a setting you turn on your camera, and essentially allows you to capture photos in the past. And so what happens is, while you're half pressing your shutter button to achieve focus and track your subject, the camera is continuously taking photos at a different frame rate you set. For my camera, I tend to set it at 120 frames every second. And it will do that for, usually on my camera, I have it set for a second. So imagine this. You're half pressing your shutter, you're focusing on your subject. The camera is continuously taking 120 photos every second and then throwing out the past second, right? So it just takes it keeps a second, and then the older stuff gets thrown out. Then when you press the shutter all the way, it records that previous second of photos. So I'm sitting there focusing on my subject. The subject takes off out of the frame. I then take press the shutter the rest of the way, and it records from a second earlier up until that moment. So I'm essentially capturing what had already happened in the past and saving that to the camera card. So that's what pre-capture is. It allows you to capture those moments where human reaction time just simply isn't fast enough.
Okay. Debbie's question for you is, do you primarily use aperture priority or are you shooting, what are you shooting, manual?
Yeah, I do 50% aperture priority, roughly 50% aperture priority with auto ISO. The key
Okay.
there for me is I set a minimum shutter speed of whatever is appropriate for what I'm trying to capture. Usually, my go-to walking around shutter speed, like the minimum, is 500th of a second. So the camera tries to always keep me at 500th of a second and not go below that. And then it varies the ISO within my given range, which for me is usually around 100 to 16,000 is kind of the max on my ISO that I'll let it roll up to. So that's what I use when it's changing lighting conditions or I'm not sure where my subject's going to be. Basically, things are kind of varied. What I use the other 50% of the time is just full manual, where I pick the shutter speed, aperture, ISO, and then just dial it in. And that's what I use when lighting conditions or the scenario is just consistent. And I just dial my settings in and I want it to go right where I want and not fluctuate and stay there. So I kind of bounce back and forth depending on what scenario.
Okay. Ben's question for you is, have you used auto capture on the Nikon Z for the remote wide angle?
I've only played with it a little bit. I haven't had a bunch of scenarios where it has been applicable yet, but it is something I've played with. I haven't had really good success with it yet, just based on the subjects, that's all. But yeah, it's basically going to take over me having to sit there with a remote and do it. And it's for anybody not familiar, it's basically like a built-in camera trap. So think about your security camera in your house. If it automatically knows when there's some movement in there and it triggers it to record, that's what this is doing, right? You can set a bunch of different parameters, but the easiest one is like, hey, if the camera sees movement, take a photo. And that's what it's built into these Nikon cameras now. It's a pretty cool feature. And I actually, you know what? I forgot. I did use it for one photo. I can show you really quick here. Um, it was a long-tailed Jaeger in Nome, Alaska. He was on prey and I couldn't get anywhere near him. So I watched him fly away. I dropped the camera in there at 24 millimeter, set it on auto capture, and then just walked away. A few moments later, he flew back and landed in there. And then here's the prey. You can see he was going after. It was a lemming that he had already killed. And then the camera captured him flying in. Of course, I had my capture settings incorrect. I should have, I'm still learning the system. So right when he came in to grab that lemming and walk off, it wasn't shooting, but I still did manage to get this photo, which was really, really fun. So that's the one success I've had with auto capture so far. So great question.
Okay. Let me ask you, I can't remember who asked it, but can you repeat the name of that donut bokeh background lens that you are using?
Yes, it is a TT Artisan 250 millimeter donut bokeh lens. Um, yeah, I think it's called uh, a reflex lens, 250 millimeter reflex lens. Yeah, but it's by the company TT Artisan.
One is this is from Valerie Hoffman, who I have shot with many, many times. Um, and she shoots a lot. So she's saying, as Christy from New Jersey and I have been discussing having so many images yet to edit, how in the world do you get through all the images you shoot?
So it's a great question. I was a wedding photographer for 20 years and
Oh,
10
okay.
of them running my own business. So I got really good at culling from doing that. That's really the honest answer. And so I just have a lot of discipline with that. Every shoot that I come back from, I sit down and just pull through them and delete everything. I actually have videos on YouTube. If you just search, Ray Hennessy culling, you can actually watch me do the entire process. So I kind of show you my thinking process and how fast I do it and my approach with it. For example, I went and shot last night some shorebird photography. I took just under 1,000 photos. I've already come back, and today I had a little bit of time, so I sat down and managed to cull that down to 56 photos. And I will then color correct all those just to make them look nice. And that's what I will also keep in my catalog and then keyword them with their species so I can search and find them at any given moment.
All right. I think this is your last question. It's a long one, so I'm going to go slow. When out in the field, how often are your creative, scenic, small and frame type shots photographed spontaneously? The second part of that is, do you often find your favorite small and frame scenic shots occur spontaneously, or would you say you plan out most of them?
That's a great question. Yeah, I did see that from Daniel earlier.
Yeah.
With my lifestyle now, much more of them have become spontaneous. And what I mean by that is we live on the road. We're always moving around, right? Um, but there's still a bit of planning there. So I don't even know if I could say accurately the percentage. I'd have to really look at it, and I've never looked at the numbers on that. But I would ballpark guess maybe 30 to 40% are spontaneous, where I just see something happen and I'm able to kind of, get the shot that I'm after and include that scenery. Uh, Probably more like 50 to 60% of the time, I am planning that shot, or at least planning putting myself in the area. So, for example, the one from Big Bend of the Canyon Wren. It's my first time in Big Bend this past winter. Um, and Emily and I went on a hike one day. We bring our cameras, but we're just going on a hike just to see some nice scenery. Wasn't even bird focused. And as we're going along, we hear the canyon wrens, see them. I see where they're hanging out, and I'm like, this looks amazing. I'm coming back with a wide lens to hang out. I had learned where a pair of them were kind of spending most of their time. And so got some nice shots of them that first time, but then came back the next morning when the light was really good. And then position myself in the right spot and then just stay there. I think it only took me about 20 minutes to get the shot, which wasn't too bad. But that was the planning. So it started with a spontaneous finding, and then the next day, a little bit more of a calculated plan to go out and photograph that. So yeah, I mean, it's a good mix of both. It really is. If I'm in an area long enough, I'll certainly try and visit and revisit to go back and plan that. Some of my other most favorite mountain goat images from Glacier National Park. Year or two ago, I don't remember anymore, uh, came about from just I saw the potential there. I knew the mountain goats were in that area, stunning habitat, and I just kept going back morning after morning. Now, the photos themselves were spontaneous. It wasn't like, oh, I want it right here in front of this mountain, but I knew the area they were hanging out in. I made sure I had my wide angle lens. And so it was planning to put myself there and then taking the photos spontaneously when they were in a good spot. So a good mix of both, I'd say.
Okay. Um, Jan's slid in a question about editing. Do you use Lightroom, Photoshop? What are you using for your editing tools?
Yeah, sure thing. 98% of it is all Lightroom now. Um, I was really good with Photoshop. I got certified by Adobe as a Photoshop expert with some of their older versions, so I know the program really well. I used it before Lightroom existed, and so I'm fast and efficient with it. So I still kind of take my photos through Photoshop just for like a little fine tuning and more of just it's kind of my workflow now. But really, the majority of the editing now happens in Lightroom just because within the last year, the masking tools have gotten so good. I find a lot of the things that I used to want to go to Photoshop to do, I no longer have to do. Some of those being more difficult kind of removals of distracting objects and stuff like that. The new AI removal tool in Lightroom is incredible and does a great job most of the time. Um, so there are still occasions where I'll go into Photoshop and do stuff just because it's quicker and I'm faster at it in there than I am in Lightroom. But for the most part, Lightroom does the trick. And for anybody that's not really great at post processing already or really knows Photoshop, I recommend Lightroom all the way. I think it's A, much easier to learn and use, and B, it also has the organizational tools. Like you guys just saw, we were talking about the auto capture thing, and in a split second, I was able to dive in, search out that photo, bring it up, and show you guys. I can do that with any photo out of my 109,000 photos in my catalog right now. That's something you can't do if you're just putting images in folders and trying to, find them in using like your own system through Photoshop and Bridge and stuff like that. And I think Photoshop, as amazing as a tool it is, it's just a little overkill and hard to learn and understand and wrap your head around. So I do have courses on my website that teach both of them because some people really just want to learn Photoshop, but I'd recommend the Lightroom one.
All right, sir. We come to the end, and
All
I have
right.
to say thank you so much for giving up your Wednesday evening to spend it with us.
Yes.
This was a beautiful presentation, and you're you're a wonderful photographer and a wonderful presenter. I personally really enjoyed this, so thank
Well,
you
thanks.
so much for doing this. All right. Um, Next week, Jody Schreier will be here to share her presentation, Portraits of Resilience. And until next time, go out and create something beautiful. and I hope that we see you again soon.